Hi, everyone. This is Derek Harp, the founder and chairman of the Control Systems Cybersecurity Association International, or as we call it, just CSA. CSA is a 501c6 nonprofit workforce development association dedicated to helping grow, support, and sustain the professionals charged with the cybersecurity of control systems. We're specifically talking about those systems that have pumps and valves and actuators, real cyber to physical moving parts, and control nearly every aspect of our modern connected industries. Thank you for tuning into the podcast. It is my hope you find it inspirational or motivating or revealing or informative, and perhaps at times even a little entertaining. Take care and be well. Hey, this is Derek Carr, founder and chairman of CSA and the host of the CSA podcast show. And I've got another great guest today to talk about their career path and things that they care about in OT and ICS-related cyber. I've got Ken Munro coming to us from across the pond. And in fact, I love that he lives near Bletchley Park. It's such a nice tie-in with encryption and security in its early form and early years. If you don't know Ken, he's a partner and co-founder of Pentest Partners, but he's also a technologist in general and a founder of multiple things, and a pilot and a skier and an all-around adventurous contributor to our community. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing well, and I know we're going to talk aviation. And if somebody who's not seeing the video of this, which most podcast listeners will not have the benefit of seeing you, they won't see the aviation-related things in your background. And this is a theme I know is going to come up today. But let's go back in time to where you grew up, where you're from.
Me, so I grew up in Oxford in England, so the university city of dreamy spires, which I still live quite close to. Very proud Oxfordian. Spent most of my childhood there, but now I live a little bit further away. I live, as you said, quite close to Bletchley Park, which is about 10 miles to my east. But I actually live on the railway line that connected Oxford and its university with Bletchley Park and then Cambridge University. So it was located there because Bletchley Park's at the intersection of the train line to two great universities, but also the north-south telephone trunks. So that's why it was there, and it's part of the reason I live so close by.
That is on my list of places to visit. I have studied some of the preservation work that's going on there, and I've seen, read some things on the web, but I haven't personally gotten to go see it yet, but I would like to.
Yeah, I was quite lucky. So I first went there in the mid 90s before it attracted a lot of external investments. And I'll be honest with you, bits were falling apart. It was just turning a corner. And then a couple of big US cybersecurity organizations put a bunch of funding in. And now it is absolutely incredible. I love the place. We use it for events. We host TV shows there. But my favorite thing by miles is the rebuild of the Colossus computer. So valves, cracking cryptography. I love it.
Amazing. And the I don't know, is it BOM or BOMBA? I don't forget how that's pronounced. None of them were saved. They had to rebuild one.
Well, sort of. So I think it's from the Polish word bomba, but actually it became anglicized into bomb. So one of the sad things for the British computer industry is all of the technology that was in Bletchley Park was either destroyed or shipped off down to our military intelligence in Cheltenham. And it all went into very dark, secret places. And we lost an opportunity to lead the world in commercial IT back in the late 40s and early 50s. But a bunch of very passionate people rebuilt Colossus, for example, from a couple of photographs.
Yeah, I love it. That is so super cool. Well, so let's talk about when technology intersects with your young life. Are you an early enthusiast, or did it come further later and during education? When is that story?
Yeah, so my story is one of failure, which I'm very proud of. I'm a physicist by learning. I studied applied physics at university. Yeah, I know. And during that time, I got into a lot of coding. So I used to develop in C++ back in the day. But frankly, I might not have taken my studies too seriously. So my university career ended in expulsion for a story that I won't tell. But that's mostly for not doing enough work. But I found my way into hotels and catering. It was the mid-90s. There was a recession going on over here. So it wasn't a great time to be looking for work without a degree. But I found my way. I ended up running hotel restaurants. And I was fascinated, but we had a really early point of sale system. Really interesting. And of course, the inquisitive me is playing around with this POS and discovered I could crash it out to DOS, and I could start running my mortgage amortizations on it and print it up on the restaurant check. And then my boss came along, saw what I'd done, and said, "I think your career lies elsewhere," as he fired me.
So you were a researcher, early researcher.
Yeah, I know, it was awkward. I was very lucky. So one of the hotel's big customers was an antivirus vendor called Dr. Solomon's. They're very famous in the UK and Europe. Not quite so well known in the USA, but they were a wonderful company. Really good tech.
Where was Dr. Solomon's out of? I remember that brand.
Yeah, so they were in my local town, run by the amazing Alan Solomon himself, who wrote one of the very first antivirus programs. We had an amazing team of people there, grew it, and then McAfee came along. They needed to upgrade their technology, so they acquired the firm, and things kind of changed after that, which is a shame, but hey, that's progress, right?
Often the case, but so you're there, you're in the thick of it there, and that's interesting. It was, that company was in your hometown or where you were living at the time. That's the amazing nexus, and then from then on, you if I'm understanding right, that your journey stays in this area.
Yeah, and what I still love actually is there's still a lot of friends I made at Dr. Solomon's, and there's this kind of little niche corner of North Buckinghamshire, just on the corner of Oxfordshire, and there's still lots of cybersecurity professionals around here, which is, it's really odd. It's this tiny little enclave of I've got friends in cybersecurity from this village and that village by a mile and that village by a mile. It's quite odd.
Yeah, I love that. It's the alumni of those ventures too. I mean, my first company I started in '97, and I bump into people still at conferences who I haven't talked to in years, but they graduated from that company to other companies and have stayed in the industry the whole time. And some of them, it was their first time in cybersecurity from the military or from other places, and they stayed in the industry, ever since. And it's been a lot of years. That's a cool thing to run into those folks.
Yeah, I'm sure you probably have it too. Is that back in the '90s, I think people in cybersecurity either came from the military or they kind of found their way in from the outside. It was a 50-50 split back in the day, I think. Is that what you saw in the USA?
Yeah, it was heavy. That was my background. I started the company as I was leaving the Navy. The co-founders were Navy. We recruited a bunch of people from Navy and DOD in general. At one point, we had 337 combined years. It was on a slide. That's how I remember it. Because we told people that, especially investors, were like, the brain trust here's got 337 years of DOD and government experience. So yeah, and there was a lot of that's the case. And even today, it seems like there's a lot of veterans sprinkled throughout security. And sometimes I've not detected it until a podcast and somebody's disclosed it. Like, oh, I've known you for 10 years and I never even knew that you were in the Army or the Air Force or whatever. Yeah.
I tried the Air Force. They said no.
Well, they were afraid you were going to maybe see what was under the plane parts or the electronics.
Absolutely. It's quite entertaining, actually. So I tried for the Air Force because I've always had, flying in my blood. I've always wanted to be a pilot. And it's a bit odd sort of to have then gone and funded my own pilot's license and finally kind of come back into cyber and aviation through the back door 20 years later.
Yeah, I want to talk about that because that's an interesting vertical, right? People are thinking, often asking me, it's like, oh, so your control system, cybersecurity, so like, oil, gas, electric, grid companies, your power companies. I'm like, sure. One grid of at least we've organized around 18 different sectors. Energy is only, gas and oil is one, electric is one, so there's two. But man, there's a bunch of other ones. And aviation is such a fascinating all by itself. So yeah, let's talk about that. So what's after McAfee, and how long did you stay? And a lot of times after acquisition, in my own experience, staying a long time is not typical.
Yeah, it's kind of hard, isn't it? Because often, the culture of an organization changes after some M&A. Yeah. And we saw that. I stayed around for a year, and I did some of their work where they do OEM and preloads, which is quite interesting. But it wasn't for me. Yeah, I think I'd seen the opportunities in other areas. So randomly, I went to work for an advertising agency for a while, which was quite a curveball. And I think I learned more about how not to do advertising and marketing in that year.
Well, that full circle must be useful in your role now, not just cyber, it's also the well-being of a company. And that means you wear some other hats. Hats I empathize with and familiar with. So that stop in your journey must also be helpful to the role you're in today.
Yeah, well, it's funny you talk about many hats with such a rack behind you there.
You can't see all my military covers, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, if you're founding and running a company, as well, and I'm sure many of the readers do, is you have to wear many hats. One thing I've always been a real fan of, though, is being able to tell a story. And it's something I learned from Dr. Solomon himself. He was always very good about telling the story of the issue, rather than explaining, something in protocol depth, going into binary, the ones and the zeros. He'd actually explain it and tell it as a story. And I've always really loved that. It's been great trying to communicate really technically involved concepts, but actually talking through the story rather than going, "Hey, look how clever I am." No, actually, let's talk about it in ways that my grandmother could understand. It becomes relatable, right?
Yeah, and that communication's everything. How things are explained. I think there's a lot of frustrated practitioners in our space, especially ones that email and communicate with us a lot, which is like, how do I get my boss or the management or the person, people above me to buy into this? It's like, well, you could say it's their problem that they don't understand, or you can start to really look at the language you're using and the story you're telling and the things maybe you shouldn't say, because you're trying to get them on board. You're trying to get their attention. I mean, it's whether it's a customer for a company or whether it's, there's similar, I think, probably lessons learned and things in that communication journey too.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? So over the years, learning to communicate in the way that the C-suite wants to understand, and talking to them in terms that have meaning to them, shareholder value, for example, risk-based decisions. And it can be, I think, quite unhelpful when people in the security industry, the cybersecurity world, talk in terms of excessive technology. It can be really easy to lose the board, and they don't understand. And I think coming to them on their terms is really powerful.
Very, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. I know that at some point, it's been many years, you've been a co-founder, for, 15 years or so of the current company. Between sort of the advertising agency and starting your own company, anything in those interim years that sort of stand out or pivotal, or a moment that is sort of informative to who you are today, or led to starting, co-founding Pentest?
So I got a lucky break, I think. My old boss from McAfee had been out of the business for a little while. He gave me a call and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I was getting bored of advertising and marketing." So I said, "Come and have a chat." So as most interviews seem to be, they seem to be in a pub over a beer with an old friend.
Love it. A pub that's 400 years old, no doubt.
Yeah. Is that right? With some very warm beer, as always. And then he just said, "Look, I'm working for a startup that discovers vulnerabilities." And this is back in 2000, so it's a little while back now. And he said, "What we try and do is we look for security vulnerabilities and we try and help organizations fix them." And this was new to me. Now, obviously, I've been exposed to cyber through antivirus, but this was all new. And all of a sudden, my eyes were opened to the opportunity, 24 years ago, to look for vulnerabilities, to alert organizations to them. And that's been the start of my journey for the last quarter decade.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that's sort of IT focused at the time. We're going to talk about OT here in a minute, but in those years, it would have been IT, right?
Yeah, no one touched OT, did it? It just works, right?
Don't touch it. Jen, it doesn't even work here anymore, but don't touch it. Windows 3.1 and it works.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, right?
Yeah.
So I then worked with them. We founded a firm in 2002, and we started off doing penetration testing, ethical hacking, if you like. And along the way, we hired a guy who came to us from a power company. He said, "I really want to get into penetration testing." I was okay, great. We ended up having a chat with him over a warm beer in a pub, as always, during that interview. And he said, "Yeah, I work in industrial controls." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, my job's to make sure that the power doesn't go out." So, and over a couple of beers, we learned a huge amount. And that guy and I still work together now. And over the last 20 plus years, he's shared everything he knows about OT and industrial controls. We've built a team that understand OT inside out, whether it's in power, water, or even in shipping. And as a result, we do services around OT cyber for most of the UK utilities and an increasing number of US utilities too.
And so that team is uniquely focused on OT. That's what they do.
Yep.
Yeah.
But we don't mind if it's a power company. We don't mind if it's a water company. We don't mind if it's the insides of a ship, which are all the same. They just float. Yeah, it's all OT. So yeah, there's a team there that goes out and helps assure the security of our industrial control systems.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk about aviation. So I know you're a pilot. I have it on good authority. You've flown into a challenging airstrip high in the mountains, and you might have left by skiing instead of flying. So I mean, you got to tell the story. But then let's talk about aviation cybersecurity.
Yeah. So I'm a private pilot. I was actually going to go commercial back in the late 90s, but unfortunately the company I was working for at the time went belly up, and that was my source of flying funding gone for a while. So I went a private pilot. I used to fly light aircraft, singles and twins around Europe, given a chance. But the crazy one was there's an altiport in a French ski resort called Courchevel. It's quite well known. It's where they held the Winter Olympics in '92. And this runway is on a hill. And like most runways, when you approach them, if it all goes wrong, you just put the power, go around and try again, right? And then you get it right. That's fine. Unfortunately, this one, because they've got a hill and then a mountain behind it, so you get it wrong, you go crash. So it's quite daunting. But I flew down there with some friends, landed quite hard, but you taxi up onto the ramp. And of course, it's in France, and I've gone there from the UK, and the guy waves you over. And then you get out and say, passport. You show them the passport, so then you put your skis on and you ski off the ramp onto the ski. It's brilliant fun. It's on those TV shows, 10 most dangerous airports in the world. This one's number 7.
Awesome. I love it. That's a great story. Well, let's talk about safety and security, not of skiing, and staying alive, which you've shown that you can do. But no, the OT in aviation is interesting, and that's one of the areas that you work in and have worked in. But that must be near and dear to your heart because it's also one of your passion areas personally.
Yeah, so aviation OT is really interesting. So the systems on board a plane are probably unlike anything else you've ever seen. So you'll be maybe familiar with real-time units, PLCs and the like, serial comms and more. The networks on an airplane, certainly older airplanes, are completely different. So they use a completely different set of protocols. They use, the concept of a PLC is probably better described as what we call an LRU, or a line replaceable unit. So when you go into the avionics bay or the EE bay in an airplane, there's a series of racks of units, like things you've never seen before. And one of them might be the radar, one might be a flight data computer, one might control one set of ailerons, one might manage the engines. But it's a series of racks that will kind of look a bit familiar, like an industrial control environment, but it's completely different, very, very different indeed. But like OT, incredibly robust, incredibly stable, doesn't fall over, and lasts forever. But just like OT, yeah, it's one thing having an industrial control system. I don't know, maybe for a power grid, right? If it falls over for a few seconds, it's bad, but the world isn't going to end. People aren't going to die if it goes for a few seconds. Do that in an airplane, you're in real trouble, right? So that stability requirement is so much higher when you're in the air. But the really good news is those systems are really well isolated. In the way that our OT was isolated from IT for years and years and years, that's still the case on an airplane. There's no real integration on an airplane. What we call the aircraft control domain, what's the flight controls, the uppy, downy, lefty, righty bit, right? That's completely isolated from any other network on the airplane. So it's not like you can sit in the seat in coach with a laptop and go, hey, I'm hacking the plane. No, it just doesn't work like that.
So network segmentation in this instance is not an argument, where maybe in a manufacturing concern, you're like, what? It's all connected. But here, no, segmentation is already in play.
Absolutely, and that's so right. I mean, so there used to be a one-way data diet. So remember when you sat in the seat, you got the moving map with your airspeed, your ground speed. So that would come from a one-way connection from the flight management system. So that would spit it one way. No, you can't go back the other way. But even now, that's now gone. So that integration just isn't there anymore. Not that you could do anything with it back in the day. So the in-flight entertainment system, they're quite interesting, actually. I must tell you a story about a 747 that I got access to. Just been retired, 2020, and we got on board with permission, of course. Never going to fly again. And looked at the flight entertainment system, control system, and it was Windows NT 351. I'm like, oh my gosh. When was the last time you saw that, right? We see old things in OT environments. When was the last time you saw NT 351 though, right?
Wow. Yeah. That speaks to the nature of these, all these industries, right? The tech refresh of an IT of like when we bought new ones this year, and like 3 years from now, all this stuff's gone. that's just not how it works over here.
Yeah, so that environment was 24 years old, and it flown with passengers 2 days before.
Yeah, but like you said, stable, predictable, solid. But
do you know the funny bit? So going back that far is like there's very little value in retaining pen testing, ethical hacking skills going back that far, because stuff gets refreshed. Even in OT, you're not going to see IT systems connected to it. They're really that old. So we had to go back to trying some very old ISOs.
Yeah,
trying to remind ourselves about all the dependencies that we don't have anymore. Even something as simple as USB, like a lot of the dependencies the tool sets need nowadays just weren't there. So it was great fun trying to have a trip down memory lane.
Oh man, I can imagine. The interesting thing about aviation is that came out in our event when your one of your team members, Joe Dalton, spoke. We had a big thing on transportation, and the aviation group, the panel. It was discussing way beyond the airplane, right? The airports. And it struck me that the airport, the more they talk, it's like a mini city. It's got fuel, and it's got electricity, and it's got access control, and it's got all the industries within it. Maybe literally all of them. I've never really looked at all 18 that we track across. And that in itself, with all these different stakeholders, it's not like one homogenous company and employees of that company. All these different stakeholders coming and going and having these areas of crossover responsibility. That for aviation cybersecurity, that must be a lot to do there.
So I'm using it. The airplane is actually relatively easy to keep secure. The airport's another match altogether.
Yeah,
that's the trouble, and everyone hears about it when there's a problem with an airport or an airline, an air operator. And it's always really weird things that cause those outages. Something as simple as the docking display. So when your airplane's coming up into, so it wants to dock, there's a little display there that tells the pilot how much more to come forward and back, right? So they always line it up. It's always the right computer, and that's saved loads of money from employing people on the ramps with their batons going up there. Those systems go down, you haven't got enough people with batons anymore, because they don't have enough people with batons anymore, because they've all been laid off because they've got computers now. So it's surprising how really simple things can actually lead to airport outages. I remember another funny one, the flight display board, so you know which gate to go to. And a large airport said, look, can you come and check over our systems? And we got to the point, said, hang on, we found a vulnerability in your flight displays. No, I believe you. Said, okay, all right. So would you give us permission to pop up our own flight on your display boards? So on the largest airports in the UK, we've got our own flight, the PTP party flight. There's a screenshot. The customer let us take a photograph on our website of us injecting our own flights. Of course, that was proving a point. But from there, we could have mixed up any gate through any terminal. And can you imagine the chaos that would have caused? No flights would have gone that day because no passengers would be in the right place. Yeah. So something as simple as one display system could stop airplanes moving.
Yeah, and you apply the right friction to one of those largest airports in the world. I mean, here in Atlanta, I think we might be the largest traffic per year. You put little friction in the right points, and it's a colossal chain effect. It's not like 5-minute delay. It compounds very quickly, and all of a sudden, all these things, that'd be chaos, and not loss of life in that scenario, but loss of money. And lots of loss of reputation and angry customers, for sure. That could cascade into a lot of stuff, including maybe even legal response. I mean, I think that's, people talk about reputation damage. It's like, are you talking about people losing their life from this particular security risk? I'm like, well, those exist, and some of them are realistic and some are not. But there's a whole lot of other risks that are entirely realistic, short of, well short of loss of life, but still quite significant.
Yeah. Now, so baggage systems are really interesting too, because they're almost invariably industrial controllers up there. The same sort of PLCs that we'll see.
Yeah.
And we had a problem when Heathrow's Terminal 5 opened up for the first time, over a decade ago. And some of the baggage systems weren't right. They hadn't commissioned them properly. I don't know what quite went wrong. But there were weeks of just bags not going to the right place, that's piled up in warehouses. It just went so badly wrong because the system didn't play ball. So It's amazing how even OT can get involved.
Yeah. So what kind of things, as you look to the future or the current state of the union today, what excites you or keeps you up at night? I mean, either way, it could be positive or on the challenging side of things.
So one of the areas that worries me on the industrial control side of things is starting to see cloud management platforms pop up. Sure. Back in the day, we kept our OT physically isolated behind locked cabinets. And for obvious reasons, we want to do predictive maintenance. We want to make it easy to remotely administrate systems. That's going to save cost and make us more efficient, right? Then I start to see the cloud getting involved. And I've seen a number of PLC vendors starting to bring together cloud management platforms. Yep. And that brings in another area of expertise that we have around, particularly APIs. So those APIs that the PLCs need to talk over cellular data or Wi-Fi into the cloud for you then to administrate them remotely. And we found bugs in recent months which gave us the ability to compromise certain vendors' cloud platforms. So you could just administrate any PLC you wanted to, which was worrying. So with organizations rushing, vendors rushing a bit too fast, who maybe don't have too much expertise in doing the cloud right, and trying to offer benefit to their customers so they can save money in terms of administration, but not quite getting the cybersecurity right along the way.
Yeah, I am seeing cloud creeping up in so many conversations, and I love the meme floating around, Facebook things like, there's no such thing as a cloud, it's someone else's computer.
Yeah.
But yeah, this concept, and I've sat in some meetings that'll sort of the bell went off for me was, we need to talk about how to do this, and that some of this is going to happen. And without wasting any time today, because I've told the story, probably too many times, but there's one particular lecture that I sat in by a large manufacturing executive, and he talked about the dollars that would be saved across all these turbines, by the data going up to their lake, the data lake, and what they had analytically, and then what they could send data back and attenuate the turbine, so man the middle attack possible, because stuff's going back. It wasn't just analytics; it was data going back and making changes. But then he talked about the business, the dollars involved, and when and so I'm telling the story anyway. But it's like 5 years ago. It was very powerful to me because I said, "Wow, that much money at stake." Taking that all as true, then that means that is where that's going to go. But man, oh man, how this is going to be done, how it can be architected. There were a lot of security discussions that day, and what I heard the people far superior in their security knowledge than me and technical knowledge was that was bad or wrong. Like, you're missing the point. We got to get in the time of discussion around architecture and how the business is going to move in that direction. There was too much money. Again, taking it granted, it was millions and millions of dollars for one customer just by being able to make those adjustments real time all the time.
It's really powerful, isn't it? And we cannot stop progress. Progress is right. It's economies, it's efficiencies, it's saving consumers money, particularly when we're running utilities. We've just got to remember to have that discussion at the same time. And one thing I really encourage organizations to do when they're buying, when they're procuring new systems, new cloud platforms, is help your procurement teams put in contractual language so there's liability for cyber in there. Otherwise, you don't have recourse, right? If you make your vendors sign up to certain cybersecurity standards, if it all goes wrong, you've got legal comeback. And when it goes wrong in OT, it goes wrong in a big way with lots of dollars on the end, right?
You're mentioning something very important there, which is there's different things that have to be done here. One is to show, reaching 100% security, not possible, but showing due diligence, showing proper due care. If you can't do that, I think the liabilities are going to get higher and higher for senior executives. That's the evidence. And I'm here in the United States now that with FDA medical devices, there's now penalties due to cybersecurity issues. I haven't peeled that apart. We got a great speaker on it coming up, Billy Rios, who knows that industry quite well. But that's the beginnings of okay, there's going to be there's going to be liability here, and so you're right. If you don't show, or at least at this level, you can't prove we got here, or you can't guarantee to be at at some, let's say 100%. I don't even know where anybody can get, but you certainly can be. Here's what we've done. We're doing as well as our peers, or better than our peers are doing.
You often find vendors are a bit more responsive when you're trying to close a contract with them, right? Often that's when they're listening. It's when they're most attentive. It's when their supply chain evidence is going to be most likely to be forthcoming, because it's going to help them win that contract. So that's the point, to my mind, where we should be making sure we've got those procurement terms and standards that they contract to. So we've got comeback.
You've nailed another important theme there. That's big, because everybody that I know at OEMs and the equipment manufacturers says, between you and me, customers are going to move our needle. They've got to demand that we do more, that we raise our bar. We're doing. Some of these people are employed at these companies to help product security, and there's teams, but they'll say over a beer, a warm beer or a cold beer. they'll say it's got to come from the customer. The customer has to make more demands of us.
Yeah, I think that's so true. We've had some really variable experiences disclosing vulnerabilities to industrial control system vendors. One I want to call out as being really good was actually Siemens. Now, of course, I think they had a lot of attention back in the day with the Stuxnet incident, but we've since found some vulnerabilities in some of their systems. And I got to say, most vendors we disclose bugs to, you just get stonewalled. But Siemens were actually really good. They acknowledged within 2 hours. They asked for more information within 2 days. They kept us updated without us pushing once a week. They asked for a little bit of extra time because it just turned out that the bug was affecting a lot more systems than we realized. And then they fixed it and they coordinated disclosure. So yeah, there's some really good examples of great OT OEMs out there.
Yeah,
it was as good as that.
that grading, I think, is creeping up, but obviously it's variable per company. And so it's great to hear your feedback on them. And there are others that are, I think, in that camp. I hear it from researchers all the time, and their stories over the last 10 years, and it is getting better. They're kind of like, oh, we should collaborate with these researchers. And I mean, researchers need to be responsible too. Responsible disclosure is big. But if you get symbiosis, like, okay, we respect that you're part of helping us out, but you're right, it used to be closed doors, ignored. I mean, not a strategy at all. But now, that's great to hear that they're receptive to you guys discovering things. I mean, what an awesome opportunity for them. You don't work for them, you're giving them value.
But sometimes it's hard, isn't it? Vulnerability disclosure is a difficult thing because someone that you don't know is trying to approach you and tell you that your baby, the thing that you built, that you invested blood, sweat, and tears in, and dollars, isn't perfect. It's a hard thing to hear that your baby isn't perfect, right?
Yeah.
So it's over the years, I've really started to understand sort of some of those personal, people, and cultural challenges around doing vulnerability disclosure, to the point where I was invited to contribute to the board of CVE at MITRE. So I sat on the board, the CVE board, for a little while, trying to bring some of the experience of vulnerability disclosure we've had over the years, and that was really powerful. Actually, it was great to be recognized for a lot of the work that we've done trying to do responsible, ethical disclosure for so many organizations.
Yeah, that's awesome. To see the inner workings of all that is probably was quite interesting. The other side of your work, like, okay, so what happens when somebody like me or our organization comes up with one of these things? How does the CVE machine work? And people take it for granted. It's like, isn't it just like, you pick up a phone and it ends up in a spreadsheet? There's a lot of parts.
Yeah, and it's amazing actually seeing the acceleration and rate of disclosures increasing as we've seen bug bounty platforms come along, and then the challenges of the OEMs trying to deal with the enormous rush of vulnerabilities that's created. It's become a real challenge for organizations to cope with that.
I empathize with them. I say, hey, you're doing them a favor, and they're not paying. Unless a bug bounty program aside, they're not paying for some of this. It's being given as a gift. It is a gift it's got a double-edged, sort of gift in that dealing with all this is not fun, but ignorance is not bliss. So just saying, if we didn't know, that's somehow better. I think that's what's proving to be not safe, right? And that's the thing they can't do anymore. Ignorance is not bliss. If somebody has discovered something, you're going to need to have an apparatus, part of your organization, that's ready to work with that. I mean, you don't really have any choice.
One of the comments that grates me sometimes is you'll often see an organization that doesn't deal particularly well with vulnerability disclosure. Then maybe it'll end up in the press down the line, and there'll always be that comment, we take the security of our customers' data very seriously, but only when our reputation is threatened, right? Yeah, and I find that a real shame that the organization could actually have embraced the researcher and engaged with them. And there's some wonderful examples. Boeing, we disclosed vulnerabilities to Boeing, who were stunningly good. They were up there with Siemens in terms of the way they listened, engaged, acted, and it was wonderful. In fact, Boeing asked us to join them on stage at RSA last year to talk about vulnerability disclosure. So that was a real tick. But yet, most of the time, trying to get organizations to listen is so hard.
Yeah, I bet. Well, what are you excited about? We have a lot of people. If you little future gazing here, as we're getting near the end of our time together, I think I always like to see what you guys are thinking about. We have a lot of entry. Well, we have a lot of people just coming in from different things, coming from the military or joining this industry, and they're like, where should I focus in a particular area? And they get all the advice about get the basics, understand how networks, how that works, and that all makes sense. but I think there's some validity to it'd be fun to be where the puck, the Wayne Gretzky quote, yeah, it'd be fun to be where the puck's going to be 5 years from now. So what are you excited about in the future? Where do you think that earlier entries in our people in our marketplace might start to learn and bone up and join working groups to make themselves valuable tomorrow?
So I'm going to bring this one back to your wheelhouse, because an area that I think is fascinating, and we've been looking at for a little while, is around maritime cyber. We've been asked over the last couple of years by a number of cruise ship operators to come and have a look at their vessels. We know our way around OT. We know our way around ships. Randomly, one of my colleagues used to be a ship's captain many years ago. When you look at a cruise ship, you couldn't imagine a more interesting and complicated environment, because you've got the engines, the OT, you've got navigation, you've got safety, fire systems, you've got elevators, you've got a casino, you've got a hotel, you've got entertainment, you've got restaurants, you've got one of everything in one floating vessel. And there's a big skill shortage in the maritime cyberspace right now. So if anyone out there with an interest in OT is looking for a new sector to take interest in, I'd go and have a look at maritime. There's a bunch of new regulations coming. So July next year, it's the International Association of Classification Societies is putting in some regulation to make maritime cyber mandatory for new build vessels. And that means if they don't comply, they're not insured, so they can't sail. So if any of your viewers are thinking about the next big interesting place to take their OT skills, I'd go maritime. It's really, really interesting. It's a bit like shooting fish in a barrel for us, because there's so much to have a go at. And you end up doing really weird things. And I'll give you one example. We're on one cruise ship a little while ago, and on board they had a golf simulator. So when you're away from the golf course for a couple of weeks on the cruise ship, you want to practice, you have a go at the golf, right? Great, simulator, have a go. And from that golf simulator, we discovered a bunch of mistakes had been made with the network segregation. And we ended up being able to take control of the steerable azipods. So cruise ships, they often have like these steerable propellers, right? And from the golf simulator, we hopped through the ITs, the segregation, into the OT environment, and they could then send commands to make the ship steer, which would override what the captain was doing. It's a really, really interesting space. So I strongly encourage your listeners to go and upskill, transfer those skills into maritime, given a chance.
That's awesome. That is a great story to end on, and a cool sort of sub-vertical, within transportation. That's another subdivision, right? And there's rails, and there's I was talking to him about cars, and he said, and trucking's different. He said, here's what's going on in trucking. He said they're related, but it's different. The long haul trucks that would be automated, and so it's different than the consumer cars that you and I are talking about today. So it's like all these can be further subdivided into these interesting things. So I would have described transportation as an interesting area, like you just did, and you dove right into the intricacies of maritime and how much growth. And I heard there was a speaker around the same time that we're having our transportation series, and he was talking about what's going to happen that's going to explode in maritime is the cheapness of connectivity. It's happening right now. It's diving. Like $10,000 a month to have the Inmarsat or whatever, and now through this new constellation, you can get, it's less than 10% that cost, and so that people can connect and owners can manage this or from afar or do this from afar. They're going to want all those features, the same stuff we're talking about for every other vertical. They want those features, but there's consequences to those features, and so it sounds like an exciting area.
Yeah, the rate of catch up. So ships used to be isolated, right? When you're at sea, maybe you had a sat phone. And it was so expensive. But now with VSAT and now Starlink, it's so cheap. Yeah. But all these ships that were really safe and secure because they were isolated at sea have now become really exposed. And the level of technical debt is absolutely stunning. It makes utilities look at the bleeding edge by comparison.
All right. Well, I think that's a good inspirational note. So, Ken, we have come to the time in the podcast where I have been in the habit now for 80 of the 105 episodes I've done, I think we've ended with the Pivot questionnaire. So I don't know if you're familiar with Inside the Actor Studio, a show that it may still be running. I really didn't look it up, but I watched it during the era of James Lipton as the host, and he has passed on. But he used this question from a French show before that. So this is probably 50-year-old questionnaire, and I haven't changed it. I use it exactly the way he did, and I'm assuming the way they did in the original show. So if you're up for it, we'll end with the Pivot questionnaire.
Let's go for it.
All right. What is your favorite word?
Okay, my favorite one is vulnerability, but for two reasons. Obviously, I love finding vulnerabilities, disclosing and getting them fixed. But I also think vulnerability in terms of a personal view, actually expressing vulnerability is really important as part of an individual and also a company culture.
What is your least favorite word?
Disclosure, because it's always painful.
What turns you on, either creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
So what fascinates me is new technologies, new things to have a go at, new things to find bugs in. Right now, for example, I'm looking at smart ski tech, and it's, again, just fascinating, the crazy stuff you find.
Everywhere. It's amazing. What turns you on?
Vendors that don't listen.
What is your favorite curse word?
I'm not going to share that right now.
What sound or noise do you love?
I love the sound of silence. There you go.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Pointless chatter.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would love to be a commercial pilot.
And what profession would you not like to do?
I'm done with working in restaurants.
And if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
We take the security of your data very seriously.
I love it. Well, I'm just wrapping up with Ken Munro, CEO, co-founder of Pentest Partners. It's been a lively and interesting conversation. Thank you for not only taking the time, but also bringing some great stories. And I look forward to sharing a warm beer near Bletchley Park with you sometime. So it's you live near one of my bucket list items. I will let you know when I'm going to check that one off.
I look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you for all your years of service to industry, and we all benefit from that. Thanks for coming on the show. Take care.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Bye bye.